All right, so I'm going to talk about why code is cool, but products are better. I'm Aaron Heckmann. I work at LearnBoost. We're building the next generation education platform on the web. And if you're familiar with LearnBoost, it's probably because of our GitHub presence. We're real believers in open source and JavaScript in general. But I'm not going to talk about any of our open source stuff today. Pretty much I want to just share some things we're doing internally that are pretty cool in my opinion. So why do I say products are better than code? We're at this tech conference where we're really in deep to this greatest techniques and how to do things really awesome as software craftsmen. But I think it's important to remember who that end user is, and maybe some of our cases they are developers, but in LearnBoost's case, it's the typical, user who knows how to use a computer or a mobile device, and they don't really care too much about that. I mean, we could spend a lot of time building a mountain of amazing, super efficient, coolest, techniques software, but our users don't really care so much about how it's made. They just want to know that it works. And in this example of an ugly antenna spitting out numbers, these users probably just care about something like a wall of boomboxes blasting fresh cuts so they can have an awesome breakdancing party. I mean, the product is the boombox in this case, and they just want their life to be improved in some way, shape, or form. So at LearnBoost, we're 4.5 developers. We're pretty small, and building our infrastructure on top of Node.js means we've had to write a lot of things ourselves. And so we kind of need to be careful about where we're spending our time because we really want to stay focused on the product, but yet work on the projects that we're really interested in and or that just need to be done because there's no module to do whatever it is we're trying to do. So we want to be more like Neo and we want to fly at 1,000,000 miles an hour, but how do we do that in general? And I'm going to cover a few ways that we do that. And primarily, the way we save time is by not writing any code. So the first way we don't write code at LearnBoost is by not writing any Ajax. And I'm not saying we don't use Ajax because we use it everywhere, like on every page, a lot. But for 99% of our use cases, we don't write it anymore. It's all just abstracted out so we can save time. And I mean, I personally believe that if you're writing Ajax today, you're probably doing it wrong because you don't really have to. And I'm going to kind of go into some detail. We use something we like to call data dynamic to take care of this for us. And it's really just a fancy name for a lot of jQuery event delegation. And part 2 is a managed JSON response from the server. So as far as event delegation goes, we'll take like a traditional form and we throw this data dynamic attribute on it. And so our event delegator picks up on that and is smart enough to just serialize the form and send it back to the server. That's pretty standard. But it's also smart enough to know if the jQuery validator fails, how to display those messages and not submit anything. So that's nothing really mind-blowing or whatever. But it doesn't have to be a form. It can be any element on our page that we feel like putting this on. And we just point that attribute at a route that we want to hit. And so in this case, our anything route is just going to go, our anything element, when you click on it, it's going to hit that wagon route. And you're not limited to a GET request, which this use case would be. But you can change that. You can put a method attribute on any element and change it to a post. And then we'll have our cross-site request forgery protection in place and all that. Another really common use case for us are dialogues. We use a ton of dialogues. And so we can just throw a data pop-up remote on there, and that is what it sounds like. We want to grab the content for the dialogue from a remote location. So, this would delegate off to the Oregon Trail route and then populate a dialogue with the response. And similarly, we do a lot of tooltips. So tooltips work the same way. Just throw this attribute on there and forget about it. So we're not writing anything client-side anymore. It's all delegated as far as setting up the requests go. So the second part of that is that response, which we don't want to write either, because we're really lazy in a good way. And so this kind of just shows several of the options that we have. We're using Express. So here, with Express, you can throw a buffer or an object, arrays, or whatever down into response.send, and it will serialize them for you into JSON and send that string down to the client. But like, these are the common use cases we have. And so once we're on the server and we do what we need to do, we can tell the client whatever it is that we feel like telling the client to do. So we can replace elements. We can emit events on either our global learn boost object or trigger events specifically on whatever elements we want to and pass in whatever args we want to. Pop-up is the same thing as that data pop-up remote that I was talking about. So we don't need to, ever get dirty with that. Redirects, success, validation failures. It's all done right here. We can control that all from the server, so we never have to write any client-side Ajax stuff anymore. It's just all delegated to this thing. So the second way we don't write code at Learn Boost is through our use of Express and Mongoose. Like I mentioned before, Express is our web framework that we're using by TJ Holloway-Chuck. And Mongoose is what we use as our ORM to talk to MongoDB, our primary data store. So we're going to look at a little demo of how we use these together. And so, can you see that? So we have this is a typical use case for us. We have some route. We have a couple queries we want to run. If any of the queries return an error, we want to make sure that we're only passing that error into next once. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Express, but next will pass the route, the control onto the next route. And if there isn't another match for that URL, it'll just like 404. So anyway, we only want to call next once, just because otherwise it can cause problems. So we're going to check for errors. And then if both queries return successfully, then we want to render those results. And it seems pretty straightforward, and it is. But it's a lot of boilerplate, in my opinion. So we can see this in action. If I'm running, which I'm not. So there it is running. We see our latest news and the things we like. That's pretty boring. But it's a lot of boilerplate. And we don't need to write any of that anymore. So what we really want to just write is render. And so this is pretty much representative of what we do. We just return the result of that query. In this case, it's get latest news and get this user's likes, and just pass them straight into the render call. And we have an Express Mongoose plugin that's smart enough to detect when queries or promises are passed in and resolve them appropriately. And if any of those return an error, it will likewise pass that error on to next one time, so it's still handled gracefully. And we don't lose any functionality there. So here's our route, the bacon route, same result, but hey, it's with a lot less code. So that makes me happy. This Express Mongoose plugin is actually something we open sourced this morning. Even though you see the little lock on there, that means it's not open source, but it really is. I can't refresh the page because I'm not online. But yeah. So if you're using Express and Mongoose, you might want to check that out. And it's also on NPM, the excellent NPM. So here's another little trick that we use. That it's actually quite simple. That TJ kind of stumbled upon, but it's extremely helpful. I really didn't think it would be all that helpful at first, but it's proven actually pretty nice. So it's instrumenting your code. So Node has this require.extensions object, so you can, like, I think it's kind of how CoffeeScript works, but it lets you jump in between that require module call and then do whatever you want with your code and then respond, or excuse me, you return that string that will get turned into what Node cares about. So what we do is we just kind of override. Actually, let me show you an example. It might be easier to see what I'm getting at. So we've got a couple lines here. We've got a commented out debug line, and then we've got a start and an end. And so what we do is we pre-process the JavaScript files when we require them, and like parse those and turn them into console.error or console.time and time end, so we can do profiling and all that. And you might be wondering why we do it this way instead of just putting console.error straight into the code, and that's because in production we don't turn profiling or debugging on, and then there's no impact to performance. So as a debugging development tool, this is pretty nifty, and it's pretty helpful because when we're doing a lot of async stuff, your call stack kind of gets blown away, and it can be helpful to see like where you were in the stack by leaving breadcrumbs or like those little trail M&Ms behind you. It's sort of a lame hack or whatever, but it really works well, and it doesn't impact anything. It's just kind of there if we need it to be. And it's also nice to see the output of our the console time if we really need to find out what query's pissing me off or whatever. It's very helpful. And if you're really having a bad day or somebody's really bothering you at work, you can just like sneak this into the code base, and then everything blows up and people get really mad. Yeah, really helpful error message when you do that. Don't do that. So that's instrumentation. And then I'm going to move on to something that's kind of near and dear to my heart, and it happens a lot. And it's a simple mistake. It's easy to prevent, but it can cause like terrible things to happen in your application, as we've seen from experience. Just global variable leaks. You're missing a var statement somewhere, and suddenly, what you think is one value turns into something else, especially when it comes to the modules that you're requiring. And so to like prevent that, there's a couple things we can do, and that's, in my opinion, supporting like using comma first. But I mean, that's not. It's just one little thing. What's more helpful for us is this thing I ripped off from Node in their tests a few months back. Was this global leak test. So basically, there's this array of all the globals that are known to Node, and if something shows up there that we don't know about, we want it to print on our console as we're developing. So all this does is just go through the globals that we know about. If it finds anything that's not supposed to be there, we're going to return that in an array. And then what we do then is we just require HTTP and then override, we proxy the send method off of that right here, which runs the normal method as it were before. However, we report all leaks that show up afterward. So here's what we just were looking at a minute ago. Leaks.find, iterate that array. If there is something in that array that we didn't know about already, then we want to record that we've seen it and output it to the console. And so to give you an example of what that looks like, we run it at startup and then after every route runs. So in this case, there's 6 unknown globals that really shouldn't be there. And those were actually all caused by Node MongoDB native, which we already patched. But this isn't perfect, right? It doesn't say, hey, in this module you messed up, and it's not JSLint and a lot of other things, but it's really, it's out of your way, it runs after every route runs, and it gives you immediate feedback, like, hey, you know, somewhere in this route we've got something going wrong, and you're kind of playing with fire if something shows up here. Yeah, because like in our experience, we had, for example, a module called errors, which we required at the top, and we used var errors equals require errors, and then in a route somewhere we missed a trailing comma, and the variable was errors, so it overrode our module, and then it led to all sorts of impossible to track down bugs in production, and like we wanted to rip our hair out. So these techniques have really helped us out, helped us avoid those situations in the future. And that's about all I have to talk about today. Code is cool, products are better. Thank you.